Grüß, willkommen in einem Fragens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 16 of my Star Trek The Original Series Timeline Analysis series of videos. In this video I'll discuss the expansion of the United Earth or United Earth territories up until the foundation of the Federation in 2161. In case you're not aware, just to remind viewers, the original series timeline is not our timeline, nor is it the Next Generation timeline, and it's certainly not the Enterprise Star Trek series timeline. I'm only focusing on information contained in the original series. One of the biggest gaps in the original series timeline is the United Earth Territory period, up until the formation of the Federation. While we do have some information concerning the Earth-Romulan War, prior to that the information is rather sparse. In order to understand how the Federation or the United Earth Territories expanded, we need to identify some of the evidence in the series that relates to this. The first is the birth of Zefram Cochrane. Zefram Cochrane of Alpha Centauri was born in 2030. He was almost certainly born on Alpha Centauri. We also know that the SS Valiant left Earth about 2055, taking 20 years to reach the galactic edge where it was destroyed. It took this long because it used impulse drive and the distance was so great. The year it was launched could have been as late as 2060 or as early as 2045, but 2055 is the most likely. We also know that Zefram Cochrane invents warp drive at the age of 31, which makes it 2061. We also know that there are Martian colonies, almost certainly colonies created by Mars that are in other systems, and they experienced a series of murders in 2105. I'm uncertain which of the colonies were affected. I think from memory there were 3. This is well before the Earth-Romulan War and just after the invention of warp drive. It's assumed these colonies were reasonably developed by this year, as why would the creature that was murdering women go to a sparsely populated place where there wasn't much food for it? We also know that there was a war between Earth and the Romulans a century ago, which is called the Earth-Romulan War. When I say century ago, I don't mean our century ago, I mean when Star Trek was running around the original series. The estimate is the war occurred about 2150 and may have lasted until 2159. I'll be covering this war in more detail in a later video, so I'm only really going to cover this very briefly as it pertains to the expansion of the United Earth Territories. We also know in the episode Wolf in the Fold, there was an alien non-corporeal form which feeds on fear called, among other things, Rejak. This creature murdered 10 women on Heliopolis, Alpha Aranti 2, about 2156. Alpha Aranti 2 must have been a reasonably well-developed colony, or at least had a reasonable population for the creature to bother go to in order to feed. This is not a lot of information to build up our theory, so once again I'll have to use other related facts to fill in the rather large gaps. One of the best facts I can use is the size of the Federation in 2260 and backtrack its growth to 2050, which is about a 220 or 210-year gap. Lots of sources indicate the Federation consisted of about 1,000 planets or perhaps systems in 2260. Other less reliable sources indicate the Federation consisted of 150 member planets or systems in 2260, which leaves us about 850 other planets. There are probably 200 star bases, with the remainder being colonies and research planets. I've created a spreadsheet and formula which attempts to backtrack growth over this 220-year period in question, and have modified the variables until I get to the desired endpoint. It's not perfect, but it does give me a rough guide to start with. A full member planet would almost certainly have a population of 1 million or more, based on at least one other episode in the series. The Earth-Romulan War began in 2150, with the main fighting starting in 2156. The 5 new member planets in 2150 would have been the 3 Mars colonies and the first 2 New Earth colonies after Alpha Centauri. They would have only had a population of about 1 million each, and would have only had light industry and certainly no ability to manufacture spacecraft. The 2 largest member planets were Earth and Mars, and all the associated Sol system resources. This constituted over 98% of the economic power of the United Earth territories, with Alpha Centauri having most of the rest. One interesting side effect about modelling complex situations is they can provide an astounding amount of detail, assuming your model is correct, that you would have otherwise not thought of. I can determine the various populations and possible location of all the member planets in 2050, for example. What we see here is 6 full member planets, which are just barely more than 1 million inhabitants each, with Mars outpopulating them by over 4 to 1 and with Earth dwarfing everything else. My modelling may be wrong, but I have assumed high population growth on the colonies and low population growth on Earth. In 2050, Earth is sending about 82,000 colonists out each year, which may not sound like much, but probably represents over 40 large spacecraft, which will not be back for quite a few years. This requires a fleet of about 100 colony ships. Even in the time of Kirk, I would estimate almost all the colonies will still be coming from Earth, with only a small number from Mars. It would not be until about probably 2300 that any colonists would be taken from Alpha Centauri, and even then I doubt it, as Alpha Centauri would still be a nicely, sparsely populated planet. Another interesting observation is that based on my calculations, which I always have to admit may be wildly off, Alpha Centauri became a full member in 2124. Zefram Cochrane's invention of warp drive in 2061 would have been very important in allowing this to occur. Another interesting point, when the alien Jack the Ripper, or Red Jack, was murdering women in the Martian colonies, that is, colonies created by Mars in other systems, the colonies were still agricultural planets with only a small population, perhaps no more than 250,000 people. That covers the population side. Now we come to even more maths. I've assumed the Federation has a radius of 400 light years and possesses 1,000 systems in the time of Kirk, which means on average the system density is 1 system per 316,000 cubic light years. In 2150, the United Earth has 50 systems, which means the volume of the United Earth is 16 million cubic light years, which requires a radius of about 160 light years. If we assume a radius of 200 light years, as I would expect initial expansion would have resulted in lower density of some systems, then we have a possible size of the United Earth territories in 2150. It could have been smaller, but then we have issues in 2260. So to remove that problem, 200 light year radius in 2150 is my best estimate. I also need some room for allies, such as the Andorians and so on, so we really do need a 200 light year radius as a minimum. Up until 2050, the United Earth was a pure Earth-based political unit. It would have bypassed any inhabited worlds and would have established friendly relations with them, that is, alien inhabited worlds, as they would have been in a loose alliance with the Vulcans anyway and did not constitute a threat. Although I must admit Earth would have still watched them very carefully. As long as the United Earth was larger and kept an eye on these planets, Earth would have felt reasonably secure, even if wary. Because the Vulcans were hovering around, I suspect the United Earth would have not initiated any hostile actions against these planets. If the Vulcans were not around, this may not have been the case, but without the Vulcans, Earth would have not moved out so rapidly, so it's a moot point. My completely wild guess for the location of Vulcan is about 200 light years away from Earth, away from the galactic centre and the Romulans, or where I think the Romulans are. The first major obstacle the Romulans met was Earth, not Vulcan. If Vulcan was in their way, it would have been the first target. I have no idea where the other planets are, Andorians, etc., but it's reasonable to expect that a sphere with a radius of 200 light years from Vulcan is probably where they would be. This means some of the alien planets would have been in the United Earth sphere of influence. It's unlikely that United Earth had any star bases in place in 2150. The Sol system contained the United Earth's ability to build starships, and Alpha Centauri would have had starbase-like facilities which allowed for basing, repair and maintenance of any vessel. Let's take a look at spacecraft. I generally don't like this chart for a number of reasons, mainly because it shows the DY-100 with a date of 1996, which cannot be correct, unless this refers to Kahn's interstellar voyage in a DY-100 spacecraft and not the first DY-100 spacecraft. The dates provided cannot be correct in summary, but nonetheless, it's what I've got to work with. It's what I've got to work with, and let's try and work with it, identify the errors and correct them. Up until 2061, all the spacecraft used impulse drive. It was most likely an inferior impulse drive to the ones the Vulcans possessed, and probably inferior to the Romulan impulse drives as well. This means the DY-200 to DY-400 would be impulse, which does not make any sense, really. The first FTL drive ship was the DY-500, which was probably built shortly after 2018. This is 26 years after the first DY-100. It's likely the first DY ship, which used warp, would have been something similar to the Valiant. So all these ships used impulse and were launched before 2055, which is why I generally don't like this chart very much. Let me try and correct some of the obvious errors. This is my guess of the DY class of spacecraft. The Earth-Saturn probe would have used the DY-300 or DY-400, a Jupiter mission, the DY-300. An unknown DY-300 may have been a high-speed craft designed for exploration and even the first manned mission to Alpha Centauri. The DY-400 looks like a heavy bulk carrier, so may have been specifically built to transport colonists to Mars. The DY-500 was the first true interstellar spacecraft capable of colonizing Alpha Centauri and for Mars to use to found its 3 colonies. It's possible it probably had a long service life, as an old one was most likely sold to Mars for its attempt to create its 3 colonies. I'm not going to make up any new DY spacecraft here, but the DY-1200 seems to be the first warp-based DY ship, perhaps. I expect the DY-700 and possibly the DY-800 were a fast exploration ship, while the DY-900 was a bulk carrier of some form, most likely for colonist purposes. I lack any images of the merchant, marine and colony ships of the United Earth from 2120 to 2160. We can only assume they continue to grow in size and speed. Let's now look at military spacecraft, starting with the first known example, the SS Valiant. There may have been earlier military vessels, but I lack any guesses to what they may have been or evidence in the series. This may not have been part of the civilian DY class series and was specifically a military class of spacecraft, which means SS Valiant may be one of a number of sister ships. Like the Enterprise, it may have had weapons, almost certainly did. I expect this is showing a later warp-capable SS Valiant class spacecraft and not the SS Valiant which left in 2055, which only used impulse drive. According to this diagram, which I think comes from Memory Alpha, the SS Valiant had 2 laser cannons and 1 torpedo tube. This would have been a later warp-capable SS Valiant, as the original would have only used impulse drive. An interesting note, when the SS Valiant went on its great exploration to the edge of the galaxy, the United Earth consisted of 2 member planets, both human, and 8 colony planets, all humans. This was a very large journey for such an early date in the history of the United Earth. I expect similar explorations occurred in all directions. Again, possibly Earth was really paranoid about potential threats and they were determined to go out and find any potential threats they could. Although I must admit they probably didn't find the Romulans, luckily for Earth. The years contained in this chart would be correct for a warp-capable SS Valiant. Perhaps this was the year of the refit. If the first Valiant class was commissioned in 2055, the 12th could have been commissioned by 2067, the latter ones being warp-capable. If they built, or Earth built, one per year until 2100, then there would be an additional 53 vessels. However, let's say 6 slots were occupied with a warp refit, so we could have a total of 59 vessels, one of which we know was lost. I personally feel this is an overly large number, so perhaps the build rate was 1 ship per 2 years, which would give us 28 spacecraft in 2100. Remember, these are military craft to a large extent, military exploration craft. It does not say this vessel was an explorer, rather it says it's a warship. But the Enterprise was also used for exploration, so this may not mean anything. I strongly suspect warship, exploration ship was, for all intents and purposes, the same style of ship, but it was not a civilian merchant ship. I doubt this type class of spacecraft was involved in any expansion of United Earth. That was the job of the civilian spacecraft, which carried the colonists. I'm now going to this excellent Earth Starfleet 2135-2160 guide, which may or may not be correct, but it's nice and detailed and fits the minimal facts I possess, so I'm going to use it unless I find any evidence in the series to the contrary. When United Earth went to war against the Romulans in 2050, this was the most numerous warship. At least 10 years old, it was reasonably old, but probably took the brunt of the initial Romulan attacks. This was the spacecraft which blunted the Romulan attack and pushed the Romulans back. I expected it would have suffered pretty horrible casualties. Supporting the Daedalus class was the less numerous Einstein class. I expect the Intrepid class ships were still being commissioned, or initially commissioned, when the Romulans attacked. This represented the most powerful vessel in the United Earth fleet in 2050. The NX class was much heavier and the first ship commissioned at the start of the war. I expect the building of this ship would have been fast-tracked due to the war, but I expect few were available for any climatic turning point battles. This was definitely a late war spacecraft or military spacecraft. I'm going to bypass a host of other ships, but this one is interesting. It's the heaviest ship built, and only a couple were available for the end of the war. I'm going to be covering the Earth-Romulan War in more detail in a later video, but I feel the war was initiated by an allied nation of either the Romulans or United Earth, and the Romulans concluded the United Earth was ripe for the picking and decided to attack it in turn. I don't feel they went all out, but probably won the initial border conflict and advanced deep into United Earth territory. The United Earth conducted a delaying action until they could assemble their entire fleet, and once the Romulans threatened one of the larger colonies of 1 million inhabitants or more, fought the Romulans and won a major engagement. This may have occurred in 2157 or 2158. After that, it was a slow and steady advance by Earth against the Romulans, first retaking lost territory and then driving deep into Romulan territory when peace was finally declared. It's unlikely any of the Vulcan allied trading planets were directly threatened. Remember, Vulcan probably had a sphere about 200 light years in all directions, and within that sphere was their allied trading planets. But once they saw United Earth was winning the war against the Romulans, they may well have joined in. I doubt they would have contributed much direct military assistance apart from a few Vulcan spacecraft, and it may have taken a while for them to assemble anything useful anyway. But in the last 2 years of the war, we could have seen some Vulcan spacecraft involved in the war against the Romulans. I personally feel the Allies assisted economically, that's the Allies in the Star Trek episode reference, assisted economically only and did not contribute much military power, apart from maybe munitions and a few spacecraft in the last few years of the war. I'm certain that they would have been nervous about being too obviously active in case the Romulans started winning again and decided to target them in turn. While I'm going to cover the Earth-Romulan War in a lot more detail in another video, the fact that the United Earth was able to hold its own and stop the Romulans is significant. Earth's warlike prior history was or must have been a factor in ensuring United Earth had a healthy focus on defence, military defence, but the Romulans were probably more warlike and would have had an even greater focus on military power, as well as recent experience. I covered this in an earlier video, but the Romulan territory would have had a lower density of stars. This lower density of star in the Romulan territories may have been a factor in their aggressiveness, but I feel another critical factor in United Earth's superior economic power was the loose Vulcan trade alliance. United Earth would have become part of this loose alliance of trading planets, and this would have had a significant positive effect in their economic growth and superiority. To be able to hold their own, they needed significant economic superiority to overcome the Romulans' greater focus on military power. I am sure United Earth's leadership would have been aware of this. As a result, a critical advantage United Earth had was the economic assistance from the Allies that were mentioned in the episode during the war. Vulcan in particular would have ensured assistance in the form of munitions and electronic components in the manufacture of weapons. My guess is the Earth-Romulan War was a war of missiles or photon torpedoes or something along those lines. Vulcan would have provided technological assistance, while Earth may have had superior drives, that's spacecraft drives. The Vulcans would have had superior technology in almost all other areas. This would have been significant in pushing back the Romulan forces. The other allies would have assisted in providing manufactured capacity for goods to be shipped to Earth, which would have freed up manufacturing capacity on Earth to produce more weapons, especially missiles and small missile carriers, which would have been the primary defence of systems. Of course, the question needs to be asked, why would the Vulcans assist? I suspect when the Vulcans first contacted Earth, they expected another low-tech civilization which they could engage in trade with. Instead, they got a highly aggressive, expansionary race which had a major focus on space travel and military power. The Earth would have quickly made contact with the Vulcan trading partners and may well have conducted their own direct trade. The Vulcans, being logical, probably felt it would be better to seek further or greater integration and cooperation with Earth, so they could keep an eye out on this seemingly unstable and paranoid race. They may not have shared their high-tech with Earth, but they made every effort to be seen in a positive light. I'm absolutely certain the Romulan attack would have been a shock to the Vulcans, as there was obviously a hostile and powerful military race out there. Only the military power of the United Earth seemingly could match it. Thus, it was a logical decision to ensure the survival of the Vulcan race was to assist the United Earth. Possibly the most significant outcome of the Earth-Romulan War was the formation of the Federation. I'm uncertain what type of political structure the Federation represented. I'll cover that also in more detail in later videos, but we can assume it was a federation of independent planets similar to the German Federation after 1871 or the US after 1776. I'm certain it was modelled on the United Earth Territory political structure, but may have been looser and now that it involved alien races. War has a traumatic effect on civilizations. The greater the crisis and damage, the greater the trauma. This trauma changes priorities by placing security above all else. Just like after World War II, the Earth-Romulan War had a significant impact by increasing the desire for security. The formation of the Federation was probably the outcome of this, which in any circumstance would have not occurred, or in other circumstances would probably not occurred. Civilizations, like people, don't change if there's no reason to do so. Greed and fear are the two main drivers of change, in people as well as civilizations. This explains why Earth would want a tighter military alliance. At the end of the Earth-Romulan War, it was obvious to the Vulcans and their possible trading party allies that an alliance with Earth was imperative, and the Earth seemed to be very generous in forming a loosely democratic federation, providing member planets a vote. Of course, the Earth would have had 12 human member planets in 2060, so even if 12 allied planets joined, the Earth probably had the dominant position. I don't feel United Earth would have offered any type of federation which would diminish its dominant position. As a result, I suspect initially it was only the Vulcans who joined or were allowed to join, with the other allies slowly joining over the following 24 years. By then the humans had even more member planets and more dominance of the Federation. I feel, based on facts in the script, it will be until well after Kirk that the humans lose their majority position in the Federation Senate. I think in 2260 the humans probably had 64 member planets and the aliens 34, but the aliens were catching up as the Federation expanded. An interesting point does come up here. These are the estimated Federation member planets which are human. As you can see, most have a very low population. If Vulcan joined and had a population of 4 billion, the population of the Federation would go up by over 25%. If the Andorrans and Tellarite planets joined, they probably had even more people, so another 12 billion. With these three planets, the humans are no longer in the majority based on population, but based on the number of member planets, they would still be dominant. In 2264, the population of aliens would be many times that of humans, but the humans would still be the largest race and possess the greatest number of member planets and votes in the Federation. It's an interesting dynamic and may make for a good episode, although political struggles tend to be a bit boring, so perhaps not. And so we come to an end of episode 16 of my Star Trek The Original Series analysis timeline, in this case covering the expansion of the United Earth territories until the formation of the Federation in 2161. The episode scripts can be found in the URL shown. Alle guten Dingen, kommen zu einem Ende.